is sufficient for you. My power is made perfect in weakness. See, his power is not made perfect in our weakness when we're trying to be strong in whatever the thornful situation that's going on. His strength is not made perfect in weakness because we're trying to fight and we're trying to contend with God. But Jesus really was telling Paul that I'm not going to remove the thorn, the hurt, the pain. I'm not going to remove it, but I'm going to give you something better, Sister Candace. What he's saying is I'm going to give you grace to help in your time of need. I want you to lace your thornful situation, lace it with grace. And really, grace is something that allows us to bear the situation that we're dealing with. God will never put more on us, Brother Zach, than that we can bear. But grace is the thing that allows you, as I said Wednesday night, to get out of bed in the morning when you don't want to get up. You don't want to get up. You want to call it quits. But grace is that thing that God gives us that allows us to bear it. And when we say at the end of the day or the end of the week, Reverend Jackson, when we say, I don't know how I made it through the day. I know how you made it. It was God's grace. And you know what I found out? That his grace never runs out. It doesn't matter how much grace you need. God has a grace bank just waiting to give you the grace that you need. But again, Jesus says something here, and it transcends time and space for us today. That my grace is sufficient for you. But Paul does something that so many of us fail to do with our thorns, our hurts, our pains, our failures. He does something that many of us do not do. And Sister Carmen, what that is that he immediately recognized that what Jesus said, one, was true. And he recognized that it would solve this hurtful situation. It wouldn't take the situation away. But he realized immediately that it would rectify how he was feeling about this thorn. He recognized immediately when Jesus says, my grace is sufficient for you. My power is made perfect in weakness. He realized something that we often don't realize. He says in verse number 9 in the B part, he says, therefore. Now what does therefore mean? Therefore, this is Paul saying therefore. Therefore means, Brother David said, I need to go back and see what was said prior to the word therefore. Now, I don't need to just go on. I need to go back and see what was said prior to. And what was said prior to therefore from Jesus was, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. So now Paul, being a little smarter than most of us, he says, therefore. Oh, he's saying, oh, okay. Oh, I understand now. He's saying, oh, I got it now. So therefore, I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses. Amen. Touched on it a little bit maybe last week, but see, we always want to boast about when, I don't know all the volleyball terms, but when we ace the volleyball over the net and it bounces off somebody and boy, we go high-fiving everybody. We want to boast in that. But when the same thing happens on the other side of the net, we don't want to boast upon that. But we have to boast in our weaknesses, because when we boast in our weaknesses, then the power of Christ does what? Rests upon us. But when we're all strong in our own self, walking around all cocky, then the power of Christ is not going to rest upon us. So Paul figured it out before we figured it out, and he's trying to let us understand it now. He figured out, therefore, because Jesus' grace is sufficient for me, his power is made perfect in my weakness. So he said, therefore, oh man, let me find a whole bunch of stuff that I can boast about in my failures. Oh boy, I got a whole bunch of stuff. See, but we don't want to boast about those things. We only want to boast about when we run the football 58 yards with no time remaining on the clock, and we're down by 6 points, and we run the football for 58 yards, and we run and we score a touchdown with our finger up in the air. We're boasting about that. We're putting the finger up. We're saying, you know, to God be the glory for it. But what we don't boast about is when we fumble the football and we're leading the game and there's no time on the clock and the other guy picks it up and runs it the other way. We don't know how to boast in those things to understand that when we get on the podium, we can still say, to God be the glory. Amen. Jesus Christ allowed me to even get here. We can be like the young man last night. I don't know if you saw it, Andrew Luck. And he came in number 2 in the Heisman voting, and they tried to get him to say whatever about the RG3 guy. And he said, I'm not going to lament on what I could have done differently and all that. He said, hey, I don't know if he said I thank God, but he said, I'm thankful for being here. And he said, that guy deserves it. You know what? The RG3, I'm with him, and boy, he's a great kid. But that Andrew Luck fella, the way that he boasted in his weakness and his shortcoming and coming up second, I want to high five that guy. He boasted in his shortcomings. We got to learn to boast in our weaknesses, that the power of Christ may rest upon us. But Paul, he didn't resist God and the circumstances that he had allowed into his life anymore. He didn't strive against what God was allowing by having this thorn. Remember, he kept praying about, God, remove this thorn from me. But what he didn't do, after Jesus clearly spoke to him, and let me tell somebody today, Jesus is clearly speaking to you on today through his word. And once Paul recognized that Jesus was speaking, and Jesus said that my power may rest upon you, and my grace is sufficient for you. He didn't try and fight God no more. He didn't try and strive against God no more. He didn't try and argue with God about what was or wasn't and all that. But this is our problem. When Jesus is saying to us, when we have our thorns today, and he's saying to us, my grace is sufficient for you. My grace is sufficient for you. My power will rest up on you in your weakness. We still fighting against God. We still striving against God. He's saying, my grace is sufficient for you. My power is made perfect in your weakness. And just because he's saying that just like that, he's not shouting it. He's not hooping it. He's just saying it. He's saying, my grace is sufficient for you. You crying. You crying. The thorn is hurting. You're crying, and he's saying, my grace is sufficient for you. My power is made perfect in your weakness. You know what we do? We put up the umbrella. I don't want your grace, Lord. No. I want you to remove this thorn. I want you to remove it right now. No. You think he's getting ready to remove it? No. No. He said, my grace is sufficient.